So we have, my wife will be taking us down into the basement. Where it is cooler. That's true.
Dad, do you mean free?
Ricky, what are the lights at? Can we go brighter? A little bit brighter.
That's so I could actually see people.
See, I can now. Ha ha!
In other words, you can walk out and you wouldn't know it?
Yes. And as a matter of fact, that is a good disclaimer. You can walk out and I won't know it. Because today is going to be we're going to be 5 to 10 minutes late. I know that. I looked at it last week. What I had done is I looked at a sermon that was supposed to be 1 week, and I said, this is too long. I divided it into 2. And then this week, my original idea was to do this. I should divide this into 2 weeks. But while looking at it, I realized I kind of didn't. I ended up making the other choice at the end and doing it all in 1 week. And the reason for that is this. There is a way over this section, if we get so myopic and stare at the tree, we can miss the forest. Or we could actually, if we only did about 4 verses, and we only looked at the 4 verses in exclusion of the other 3.5 chapters, we might actually come away with the opposite lesson of what is being shown here. So the reason we're going to be doing all of this whole big block here is because it'll give us context. And everything will fall into place. So we'll get that makes sense. So the title here, this is not I said keeping promises. That's not a good title. There was a better title, but that slide died a long time ago. Instead of keeping promises, I said restoring Oughtness. I like that. Restoring Oughtness, because that's really what we're seeing here is at this section in Ezekiel, we're seeing God making the world the way that it ought to be. This is a period that Ezekiel is identifying with to throw us in context. We are talking about the millennial reign where Jesus is reigning in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. Is 1,000 years literal or figurative? I don't know. For a period. A very long period is the idea. This is not the new heavens and new earth. This is the same old earth, just under new management. That's kind of what this is at. We have, as we look at both Revelation chapter 20 and Ezekiel kind of weaving it all in together, what this is, this fills in kind of that millennial period. So kind of, if we take the fairly literal read of how the closing of the book goes, we have that tribulation period with the Antichrist and all the stuff that everybody talks about. That's that seven years before Jesus comes back. Then Jesus comes back and reigns for a period. And this is the part that Ezekiel's talking about right now. And then at the end of that 7 years back, there's another rebellion. Because you know what? People rebel even when placed in the garden sometimes. So there's some people that make a bad choice at the end. And then at the end of that, that's when there's the point where everybody gets up and God says, you guys go to the lake of fire, you guys go on to the new heaven, new earth. Make sense? Okay. Hey, I understand we do an interactive service, so there's a lot of questions that might come up. I'm okay with that too. But we're gonna be moving fast. All right? Yes? Yeah, I saw this. All right, here we go. So starting out in Ezekiel 44, this is out of the NLT version. Then the man brought me back to the east gateway and the outer wall of the temple area, but it was closed. And the Lord said to me, the gateway must remain closed. It will never be opened again. No one will ever open it and pass through it, for the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered there. Therefore, it must remain shut. Only the prince himself may sit inside the gateway and feast in the Lord's presence. But he may come and go only through the entry room of the gateway. Then the Lord brought me through the north gateway of the front of the temple. I looked and saw the glory of the Lord fill the temple of the Lord, and I fell face down on the ground. And the Lord said to me, Son of man, take careful notice. use your eyes and ears and listen to everything I tell you. Tell you about the regulations concerning the Lord's temple. Take careful note of the procedures for using the temple's entrance and exits. So if you're wondering why we're going to be 5 minutes late today, it's because Ezekiel listened very well here. And he takes very detailed notes. So stand by. So good on Ezekiel. So sorry that somebody else might beat you to the lunch buffet because of Ezekiel. But here's the deal. For this, Ezekiel is closing out. Remember, what we know biographically about Ezekiel is he was supposed to be a priest. But at 30, when he was supposed to become a priest, he was already in exile. Or he was already had been taken away, and he was outside Babylon. So he never got to stand up as a priest. So everything that he thought how serving God would look like at 30, it wasn't looking like that. And by this point, the temple's been destroyed. So when God is giving him this picture of a temple, it's showing all the things that he has longed in his heart to do, and it's showing it in a state of being fulfilled. Now, some folks point out the fact that the picture in Revelation is slightly different, partly because John is looking for different things, so he's identifying different things. Ezekiel really is focusing on the function of the priests in this period because that's what he wants to do. There's some of that. Make sense? Okay. On that, we'll move. There's a picture. I will say this, as far as cast of characters, you get that there's the Lord, which is Jesus Christ. There is also a prince who is not Jesus Christ. Lowercase p, prince, who is kind of the political head during this, is a political figurehead, kind of like Moses. And that's really what it is. It's a picture back in the tabernacle. You've got Moses and Aaron functions. You've got what Moses did and or you got what David did and what the high priest did. All of those folks are functioning kind of in the temple. And you see, more importantly, you see the glory of God back in there. The other one that I kind of want to run on just because it gives me a question, you scratch your head and you go, why is the gate closed? The gate's closed because it's the idea that there's the finality of the temple. This whole book started with the idea of the glory of the glory of God left the geographical area of Jerusalem because they weren't functioning right. So God's glory left the temple and went where his people were, where Daniel was, where Ezekiel was. And then what's happened now is God's put his people in this space. He set out this space for a special purpose. And when Jesus enters, this is the idea that it's kind of the walls are closed because this is it. There's not going to be a time that Jesus is driven out of the temple. There's no need to use that gate anymore. That's the picture. All right, and give these rebels, the people of Israel, this message from the sovereign Lord. O people of Israel, enough of your detestable sins. You have brought uncircumcised foreigners into my sanctuary, people who have no heart for God. In this way you defiled my temple, even as you offered me my food, the fat and blood of sacrifices. In addition to all the other detestable sins, you have broken my covenant instead of safeguarding my sacred rituals, and have hired foreigners to take charge of my sanctuary. Now this is the part where I'm saying if we get so myopic, we could actually come away with the wrong lesson. Because if we look at this in a certain light, it looks like the problem is that they have people that are not of pure blood doing the stuff. That first early quick read can be like, oh, well, why do you have people there that aren't part of the promised people? As a matter of fact, I just kind of want to remind you that when we were going through Acts, when Paul almost gets stoned, crushed with stones, murdered, in the temple, he does it, or the reason they do it isn't because he's preaching about Jesus as the Son of God. They try to kill him because they think he snuck some Gentiles in the temple. They had no problem when he talked about Jesus. They had a big problem when they thought maybe he had a Gentile under his cloak or something. Because they were like, we want to make sure the space is pure with only Gentiles. But let me just say, there's a clause right there that says, people who have no heart for God. Do they have no heart for God because they're foreigners? Well, look at the larger context. The larger context is he's talking about the rebels of Israel who are descendants of Jacob, but are not in line with God. As a matter of fact, as we move forward, we're going to see it here coming up. So this is what the sovereign Lord says. No foreigners, including those living among the people of Israel, will enter my sanctuary if, big if, this is the clause, if they have not been circumcised and have not surrendered themselves to the Lord. So what we see is it's not, he hasn't grouped everybody into two groups, either foreigners, Jews, and everybody else. That's not what he's broke. He's actually kind of broken them up into four groups. He's broken them up into people that are biological descendants of Jacob, but not followers of Yahweh. So these are the rebels. Or you have the foreigners who are not followers of Yahweh, and the foreigners who are followers of Yahweh. There's actually four converts. We could say converts. We could say, so that's what. Let me continue to read on. And the men of the tribe of Levi, who are biologically right, they're even probably culturally right, but who abandoned me when Israel strayed away from the worship of idols, must bear the consequences of their unfaithfulness. They may still be temple guards and gatekeepers, and they may slaughter the animals brought for burnt offerings and be present to help the people. But they encourage my people to worship idols, causing Israel to fall into a deep sin. So I have taken a solemn oath that they must bear the consequences for their sin. Says the sovereign Lord. They may not approach me to minister as priests. They may not touch any of the holy things or the holy offerings, for they must bear the shame of all the detestable sins that they've committed. They are to serve as temple caretakers, taking charge of general maintenance work and performing general duties. However, the Levitical priests of the family of Zadok continue to minister faithfully in the temple when Israel abandoned me for idols. These men will serve as my ministers. They will stand in my presence, offering the fat and blood of the sacrifices, says the sovereign Lord. They alone will enter my sanctuary and approach my table to serve me. They will fulfill all the requirements. Okay. So you got rebels, you got foreigners, you've got all this. Let me go back to this group right here. I'm going to take the lowest level of authority and say this is my understanding of it. There's going to be folks that disagree with me, Christians that disagree with me. It's okay if you disagree with me. I'm just going to throw this out there. When I see Zadok, again, I think the priesthood of Zadok, I take Revelation 20 and I take Hebrews and I nest it in there because they call Jesus the high priest of Melchizedek. Melech comes from king. Zadok is righteousness, the king of righteousness. It's the priesthood of the king of righteousness. This is the same thing. Who I believe these guys are. I believe these guys are Christians. They are the believers. They are the followers in the priesthood of Melchizedek. Melech for king, Zadok for priest. Ezekiel doesn't understand it that way, so he writes it this way. But the priest king, he would say, absolutely, priest king. So the king, Melech, and Zadok, the righteous king. Absolutely, the righteous king. Melchizedek. Okay, great. So you're like, that's who it is. So he's thinking of a political family. I'm saying it, or a genealogical family, I'm saying it's one tied to this. And the rest of the structure here is pointing out not to their biology, but to their faithfulness. And you can almost see it, if you look at it, you can almost see that there were Jews that did not follow God, and they essentially took their worship away from Yahweh after they rejected Christ. So we've got these people who are now in a state, they're good, they can do grounds work, and they can do that sort of stuff, but they don't have the same blessing. And specifically in Revelation chapter 20, you see that there's a resurrection of those folks that died during the tribulation period. And these people are they are raised from the dead for a special purpose of being priests for Yahweh, priests for the Lord in the temple. Which tells me that probably these cats, that's who these cats are. Make sense? Not literal cats, by the way. Just checking. These guys. All right, that's a lot of stuff. So here we go. When they enter the gateway of the inner courtyard, you must wear only linen clothing. They must wear no wool while on duty in the inner courtyard or the temple itself. They must wear linen turbans and linen undergarments. They must not wear anything that would cause them to perspire. That's why I preach in shorts. No, that's not. But here you go. When they return to the outer courtyard where the people are, they must take off the clothes that they wear while ministering to me. They must leave them in the sacred rooms and put on other clothing so that they do not endanger anyone by transmitting holiness to them through this clothing. They must neither shave their heads nor let their hair grow too long. Instead, they must trim it regularly. The priests must not drink wine before entering the inner courtyard. They may choose their wives only from among the virgins of Israel or the widows of the priests. They must not marry other widows or divorced women. They must teach my people the difference between what is holy and what is common, what is ceremonial, clean and unclean. Boy, this is interesting. We see here, I don't know, this is the third time I'm saying it. I'm still going, I don't know if I should mention it. This looks a lot like working at Disneyland. And for a lot of the same reasons. Like, very interesting in Disneyland, here's some rules. They have hair rules. Like, they can't be certain extreme haircuts. They got to be kind of conservative in nature. That's what it says. No shaved heads, because first of all, there's religions that value shaved heads. And they don't want to look like that. They just want to be clean cut. That's kind of the idea. They want to look like they're in costume in there. As a matter of fact, Disney World has a lot of tunnels. They almost have a second row of tunnels. Disneyland has tunnels too, because they want to minimize the time that people are walking through in non-costumes, not the right costumes, because they don't want to break where people are at in their learning. They take it very seriously. This whole situation, they take it seriously, because what we have is we have a place where we have this temple, and this temple is trying to show the rest of the world that there is a holy way to be, because not everybody alive on the planet is wholly following Christ. There are still people that are making bad choices. So this is a place, this is kind of a way of instruction. So they're saying here, this is what it kind of looks like, holy and unholy. We have to take holy and unholy seriously so that they learn that holy and unholy is serious. Clean and unclean. They will serve as judges to resolve any disagreement among my people. Their decisions must be based on my regulations, and the priests themselves must obey my instructions and decrees to all the sacred festivals to see that it's fit. See to it that the Sabbaths are set apart as holy days. I'll pause for a second. Some people ask me, does that mean that that we will be serving in the temple during this 1,000 years? I don't know. I know who will be as the people that were martyred. They I know because it explicitly says that. Where it is slightly implied is Paul implies that we will rule and reign with Christ. So you can go, well, maybe that's here. So that judging, this might be a reference to that. So I don't know. I'll leave it as that. Both reads can be made in the Bible. It's not clear enough for me to stake out a position very strongly. A priest must not defile himself by being in the presence of a dead person unless it is his father, mother, child, brother, or married sister. In such a case, it is permitted. Even then, he can return to his temple duties only after being ceremonially cleansed and then waiting for 7 days. This is a picture. All of these regulations are a picture of what was set up for the temple. Part of it was a reminder that our religion isn't a religion about death; it's about life. So the priests need to be pointing to life. So it's recognizing that death does happen, but it's like, hey, because you're a priest, you can't be, it may be somebody you like, it might be your uncle, it may be somebody like that, but that can't define your day. Your day has to be because you're set apart for a purpose to do this other thing. Now, they understand that there's going to be close relationships that'll happen. If it's your son or daughter, you're going to be affected by it. Understand, there's some space to that, but you don't get sucked into everything else. That's kind of what it's doing. The first day, he will return to work and enter the inner courtyard. This is after he's been dealt with a close family death. And the sanctuary, he must offer a sin offering for himself, says the sovereign Lord. The priest will not have any property or possession of land, for I alone am their special possession. Their food will come from the gifts and sacrifices brought to the temple by the people. The grain offerings, the sin offerings, the guilt offerings, whatever anyone sets apart for the Lord will belong to the priest. The first of the ripe fruits and all the gifts brought to the Lord will go to the priest. The first batch of dough will also be given to the priest, so the Lord will bless your homes. The priest may not eat any meat or any bird or animal that dies from a natural death or that dies after being attacked by another animal. So what we see is we really see a new priesthood kind of being pictured out here. And remember, Ezekiel started out with Ezekiel identifying that the priests had lost their mind, the leaders of Israel had lost their mind. They were serving other gods, even in the temple. So it's like, boy, it ought not be like this way. So what Ezekiel was mourning and saying it ought not be like this, it ought to be like, well, he's saying that it's going to be the way that it ought to have been. When you divide the land among the tribes of Israel, you must set aside a section of the land as his holy portion. For the Lord as his holy portion. This piece of land will be, I'm going to read a lot of things, but don't worry, there's going to be a picture coming up to show it here in a second on the map. 8 1/3 miles long and 6 2/3 miles wide. The entire land will be holy. A section of the land measuring 175 feet by 175 feet. Remember, that was the temple that we talked about last week? It was that little box. An additional strip of land, 87.5 feet wide, is to be left empty all around within the larger sacred area, measuring out a portion of the land 8 1/3 miles long and 3 1/3 miles wide, located in the sanctuary. The most holy place will be located. This area will be set aside, will be holy, set aside for the priests who minister to the Lord in the sanctuary. They will use it for their homes, and my temple will be located within it. The strip of the sacred land next to it will also be 8 1/3 miles long and 3 1/3 miles wide. Will be a living area for the Levites who work in the temple. It'll be their possession and a place for their towns. Adjacent to the sacred area will be a section of land 8 1/3 miles long by 1 2/3 miles wide. And this will be set aside as a city for anyone in Israel can live. 2 special sections of the land will be set apart for the prince. One section will share a border with the east side of the sacred lands, and the city of the second will share the border on the west side. Then the far eastern and western borders of the prince's land will line up with the eastern and western borders of the tribal areas. This section of land will be the prince's allotment. Then my princes will no longer oppress and rob my people. They will assign the rest of the land to the people, giving them allotment to each tribe. It would be interesting if you're like giving the people in Washington. It's like, okay, you got Washington, D.C. You guys can go crazy with Washington, D.C. and Maryland, but you guys can't touch anybody else's stuff. Just stay down there. That's kind of what this is setting it up. Because there's going to be a political class of people that are still going to be making rules and doing stuff. Now they got to do stuff according to God's guidance. They can't just be saying black is white. They've got to rule justly, but they'll be establishing it that way. Now, if you notice, this is ahead. I'm gonna step out of frame for a second so I can point over here. So you see, we're going to hear he's going to divide out the 12 tribes, kind of this area. This is what the border is going to be, what I'm going to be describing. But it has a strip right here for that sacred space. And what it does is it builds this box right here. So this is a picture of the box. So you've got the temple right there in the very center, and then there's kind of like a park around it that people can do and do stuff in it. And then you've got some areas set aside for farming and for the Levites and the priests of Melchizedek. And then you have these areas on the outside where the leadership gets to do their stuff. The priesthood gets, the princes get to do their stuff. Does that make sense? Kind of house. There you go. So that's it. Really what it is, again, is it's a picture of both the tabernacle and the garden. See, when we see sacrifices, we always see the killing of the animal. And that is an element of it. But really it's a sacrifice is more than that, because the sacrifice doesn't end with the killing of the animal. It actually is a provisioning. So what happens to the animal? There are elements of the animal that are burned as an offering to go into God, but the rest of it's eaten by people. Sometimes it's eaten by the people that provide the sacrifice. Like as in the Passover. The Passover, the family that sacrifices the animal, it's their dinner. It's their barbecue. Sometimes it's for the priest, but it's kind of that idea that the sacrifice was more than just the death of this animal. It was a time for fellowshipping and eating and remembering what God did for you. And this is something we've talked about before. As evangelicals, we understand. We look back and we say, well, we don't need to sacrifice animals to be forgiven. And that is absolutely true. Because our sin was forgiven on the cross. But the truth is, no animal sacrifice saves anybody. So when they were sacrificing animals before in the temple, they were hoping that eventually God would send the proper sacrifice. So it was kind of like a claiming, hey, as this lamb dies, one day God will send the Lamb of God. There's this idea that they're looking forward. They were looking forward to an event, we're looking backwards. I used the same parallel of Passover. The first Passover, they were looking at the idea that God was going to rescue them. And then after that, they were doing it after it, they did Passover, looking back about, remember how God rescued us in there? And at the same time, they're going, and one day God's going to send the Messiah to rescue us again. So it was kind of one of those backwards, forwards. When we take the Lord's Supper, we almost do the same thing because we say this. Jesus says, for often as you eat this bread and drink this blood, do this in remembrance of me. And then it says, for as often as you eat this blood and drink this cup, you proclaim my death until he comes again. So there's even a kind of a backwards, forward. The sacrifices here, that's what's happening. Nobody's getting their sin forgiven in this way. It's a reminder of the consequences of sin. It's a reminder. There is a certain cleanliness to it. It's a reminder because people are still sinning in this world. But it's still Jesus' blood that is the only thing that really cleanses. So it's only as a symbol of Jesus that it matters. For this is what the sovereign Lord says, enough, you princes of Israel, this is his line to the leadership. Stop your violence and oppression and do what is just and right. Quit robbing and cheating my people out of the land. Stop expelling them from their homes, says the sovereign Lord. Use your only honest weights and scales and honest measures, both dry and liquid. The homer will be your standard unit for measuring volume. The ephah and the bath will each measure 1/10 of a homer. The standard unit the weight will be this silver shekel. 1 shekel will consist of 10 gerahs, and 60 shekels will be equal to the mina. So guess what? The metric is out. So there you go. So there's this idea. Again, why he's talking about this is because what the leaders of his time had done wrong and were judged was they were stealing from the poor, they were oppressing, they were doing it. So he's going, hey, listen, and in the future time, they're not going to be allowed to do that. You must give the tax to the prince, 1 bushel of wheat or barley for every 60 you harvest, 1% of your olive oil, and 1 sheep or goat for every 200 in your flock in Israel. And so, hey, there's good news. It's not quite a flat tax, but it's even better. Some things are pretty low. It's not 10%. Oh, it's even less than that. That's good, right? Boy, that's a small amount of. So what is it? That's like 0.5% of your flock. What's 1/60th? That's like 1.5. It's ish. 1.3 maybe 1.3% of your wheat and barley. 0.5% and 1% of your olive oil. That's not so bad. These will be your grain offerings, burnt offerings, and peace offerings. They will make atonement for the people who bring them, says the sovereign Lord. All the people of Israel must join in bringing these offerings to the prince. The prince will be required to provide offerings that are given at the religious festivals, the new moon celebrations, the Sabbath days, and all the similar occasions. He will provide the sin offerings, the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, liquid offerings, and the peace offerings to purify the people of Israel, making them right with the Lord. Now, I know some of you might go, well, why? Can't God just make a tree that just keeps growing and doing stuff? Well, part of it is by these people giving and participating, they're part of it. They have. So even if you're not there serving at the temple doing the stuff, by giving to it, you have kind of an ownership of it. there's a way in which we all can contribute. That's kind of what it is. It's kind of give them the whole land there connection to what's going on in the temple. And this is what the Sovereign Lord says: in early spring, on the first day of each new year, a sacrifice of young bull with no defects to purify the temple. The priests will take blood from the sin offering and put it on the doorposts of the temple, the four corners of the upper ledge of the altar, and the gateposts at the entrance of the inner courtyard. Do this also on the seventh day of the new year for anyone who has sinned through error or ignorance. In this way you will purify the temple. On the 14th day of the first month, you will celebrate Passover. This festival will last 7 days. The bread that you will eat will come at that time will be made without yeast. On the day of Passover, the prince will provide a young bull as a sin offering for himself and the people of Israel. On each of the 7 days of the feast, he will prepare a burnt offering to the Lord, consisting of 7 young bulls and 7 rams without defect. A male goat will also be given for each day of the sin offering. The prince will be provided a basket of flour as a grain offering and a gallon of olive oil with each young bull and ram. During the 7 days of the festival of shelters, which by the way is kind of like a camp out. It's what it is. Everybody lives in tents to remember when God was with the people as they were traveling in the Exodus. That's what it's for. Which occurs each year in the autumn. We should have a camp out now. The prince will provide the same sacrifices for the sin offerings and burnt offerings and grain offerings along with the required olive oil. So I don't know if you picked this up, but there's this idea here is you see provision for everybody coming in here. You've got this idea that kind of working the land is that picture in the temple that we saw last week. We see it all happening now as people are coming into the temple and participating and eating and doing all this living together. That provision is part of it. And then part of the provision is celebratory. They're all celebrating kind of back to the things that God did. We celebrate. You see this the Sabbath. The Sabbath is being set up there because the Sabbath was a remembrance of how God took 6 days, 6 special days, to set up the land for people to be with Him. So that's what we're celebrating and doing that. And they celebrate all that sort of stuff. We see this. We're celebrating the seasons and God's work. It's kind of like nowadays, we do holidays every year. We celebrate when we rebelled against Great Britain by throwing off fireworks. We do that when remember. We celebrate how some pilgrims were saved through the winter by trusting in God and through the intervention of some good Native American friends, right? So we see that, we celebrate that at Thanksgiving. That's what we see here. This is what the Sovereign Lord says. The east gateway of the inner courtyard will be closed during the 6 work days, there you go, each week. But it will be open on the Sabbath days and the days of the new moon festival celebrations. The prince will enter the room of the gateway from the outside. Then he will stand by the gatepost where the priest offers his burnt offerings and peace offerings. He will bow down and worship inside the gateway passage and then go back out the way that he came. The gateway will not be closed until the evening, and the common people will bow down and worship the Lord in front of the gateway on Sabbath days and on the new moon celebrations. Each Sabbath day, the prince will present to the Lord a burnt offering of 6 lambs and 1 ram, all with no defects, and he will present a grain offering with a basket of choice flour to go with the ram, with whatever amount of flour he chooses to go with each lamb. And he will offer 1 gallon of olive oil for each basket of flour. At the new moon celebrations, he will bring 1 young bull, 6 lambs and 1 ram, with no defects. With the young bull, he must bring a basket of choice flour for a grain offering. Then he will also, then the ram, he must bring another basket of flour. And with each lamb, he must bring whatever amount of flour he chooses to give. With each basket of flour, he must offer a 1 gallon of olive oil. The prince must enter a gateway through the entry room, and he will leave the same way. But when the people come in through the north gateway to worship the Lord during the religious festival, they must leave through the south gateway. And those who enter through the south gateway must leave through the north gateway. They must never leave the same way that they came in, but they always must use the opposite gateway. The prince will enter and leave the people with the people at these occasions. People are like, somebody has asked why, I don't know. I like it because it kind of gives this picture of movement. You're moving with God, you're not no retreat. There's no retreat, there's only advancing. The other thing I like about it is there's a picture that you're going through the center. So nobody's missing out. Everybody's going through the center of the temple. I think that's kind of neat. So at the special feasts and sacred festivals, the grain offerings will be a basket of choice flour with each young bull, another basket of flour for each ram, and as much flour as the worshipers choose to give with each lamb. Give 1 gallon of olive oil with each basket of flour. When the prince offers a voluntary burnt offering, a peace offering to the Lord, the east gateways to the inner courtyard will be open to him, and he will offer his sacrifices as he does on Sabbath days. Then he will leave, and the gateway will be shut behind him. Now, I know somebody was pointing out this is a lot of bread being made, a lot of meat, a lot of this. There's a lot of people. You look at Disney World. Back to Disney World. Boy, your family eats a lot when it's there. The idea is this is all here for all these people to come in and celebrate. This is the wedding feast. Where do we get the wedding feast? Boy, isn't it great that God allows it so that we get the wedding feast from working with each other? That there's still this cooperativeness that happens. Each morning you must sacrifice a 1-year-old lamb with no defects as a burnt offering to the Lord. With the lamb, a grain offering must also be given to the Lord, about 3 quarts of flour with 1/3 of a gallon of olive oil to moisten the choice flour. This will be a permanent law for you. The lamb, the grain offerings, and the olive oil must be given as a daily sacrifice every morning without fail. What we see here is we see a fulfillment of all the covenant. Everything from the Old Testament has been moved up into here. And that's really what we've seen. We've seen with the temple, it's a fulfillment of the promise of the garden. It's a fulfillment of the promise of the original temple of the tabernacle. This is what the Sovereign Lord says. If the prince gives a gift of land to one of his sons as an inheritance, it will belong to him and his descendants forever. But if the prince gives a gift of land of his inheritance to one of his servants, the servant may keep it only to the year of Jubilee, which comes every 50th year. At that time, the land will return to the prince. But when the prince gives his gifts to his sons, those gifts will be permanent, and the prince will never take away anyone's property by force. If he gives property to a son, it must be from his own land. For I do not want any of my people unjustly evicted from their property. In my vision, the man brought me through the entrances through the gateway and led me to the sacred rooms assigned to the priests, which faced toward the north. He showed me a place at the extreme west end of the room. He explained, this is where the priests will cook the meat for the guilt offering, the sin offerings, and bake the flour from the grain offerings into bread. They will do it here to avoid carrying the sacrifices through the outer courtyard and endangering the people by transmitting holiness to them. Then he brought me back to the outer courtyard and led me to its 4 corners. In each of the corners I saw an enclosure. Each of the enclosures was 70 feet long by 52 feet wide, surrounded by walls. Along the inside of these walls was a ledge of stone with fireplaces under the ledge. All around it, the man said, these are the kitchens to be used by the temple assistants to boil the sacrifices offered for the people. So we see preaching, we see a celebration, we also see teaching. Holiness still matters because what's happening in the temple is also a lesson to those around during the millennial reign. In my vision, the man brought me back to the entrance of the temple. There I saw a stream flowing beneath the door of the temple, passing to the right of the altar at the south side. The man brought me outside the wall through the northern gateway and led me around the eastern entrance. There I could see the water flowing out through the south side of the east gateway. Now I will tell you this. This water, the question is it figurative, is it literal? Well, remember when Jesus is pierced by the side, you see blood, you see water. There's a picture of that. Jesus describes himself as living water, which he does. What we see here is we see a picture of living water. Is it literal or is it figurative, the idea that Jesus' sacrifice is spreading out through the world? Let me tell you, I will say this. What we see here is we see water acting supernatural. And I'll leave it at that. Because look what's going to happen. It starts out as a small stream by the altar and it comes out. And it says, measuring, so he's measuring out with the guy. He takes me along the stream 1,750 feet, and he let me cross, and the water was up to my ankles. He had measured off another 1,750 feet, it's up to my knees. Another 1,750 feet, it's measured, it's at waist deep. another 1,750 feet. You've got to swim across. It's that deep. So what we're seeing is we're seeing the water get deeper. This little stream that started at the beginning and gets deeper. Let me tell you, that's not how water works. The way water works is the reason that water gets deeper downriver from upstream is because many tributaries come in and feed it. So it adds, it accumulates many tributaries. This is water that has only one source. So if the water only has one source trickle at the beginning, it's got to be the same trickle all the way down. But we're seeing a spiritual supernaturalness of multiplication. It's miracle water in a very, very big sense. Now, he asked me, have you been watching, Son of Man? Then he led me back to the riverbank. So now this thing that starts out as trickle is now a riverbank. And when I returned, I was surprised by the sight of many trees growing on both sides of the river. Then he said to me, this river flows through the desert in the valley of the Dead Sea. The water of the stream will make the salty waters of the Dead Sea fresh and pure. Does that happen in the real world? What happens when fresh water mixes with salt water? It's brackish. It's still dead. But in this case, we see a purification that happens, a miracle. The waters of the stream will make the salt water of the Dead Sea fresh and pure. There will be swarms of living things where the water in the river is flowing. Fish will abound in the Dead Sea. It's called the Dead Sea because there's no fish there. For its waters will become fresh. Life will flourish everywhere this water flows. This is the picture. We see trees with fruit and water. What's it sound like? It sounds like the Garden of Eden. It's a restoration of the Garden of Eden. Fishermen will stand along the shores of the Dead Sea all the way from En-Gedi to Engalim, and the shores will be covered with nets drying on the ground. Fish of every kind will fill the Dead Sea just as they fill the Mediterranean. But the marshes and swamps will not be purified. They will still be salty because there's animals that live in the marshes and swamps. It's very amazing. What we've got all these ecosystems that are going to be there. It's kind of like a zoo. You'll be able to walk out and see the swallows standing in the salt marshes. And then you'll be able to grab some fish, freshwater fish here. It's amazing that all this will happen. Fruit trees of all kinds will grow along both sides of the river. And the trees of these leaves will never be brown or fall. And there will always be fruit on the branches. There will be a new crop every month, for they are watered by the river, flowing from the temple. The fruit will be food for the leaves. The leaves for the healing. So we see this amazing living water happening, and all of this is teaching the holiness and all the things that's going on. We're almost there, guys. We're making it. This is what the Sovereign Lord says: divide, and here's why we're here. Divide the land in the way to the 12 tribes of Israel. Somebody to ask when we were first doing this, would I be able to, if I lived during this period, can I move to Israel? And here's where we find out. Divide the land in this way between the 12 tribes of Israel. The descendants of Joseph will be given 2 shares of land. Otherwise, each tribe will receive an equal share. I took a solemn oath and swore that I would give this land to your ancestors, and now it will come to your possession. So God is fulfilling his promise. These are the boundaries of the land. The northern border will run from the Mediterranean these are the Lake of Hamath and Zedad. This is across the north. If we were looking from where in the world today, we're looking across toward Damascus, is really what we're doing. There we'll run to Beeroth and Sirdam, and then we'll go to the border of Damascus and Hamath, and then finally to Hazar Hadikon, and then the border of Aram. And then the northern border will run from the Mediterranean all the way across to the Hamath, to the border of Damascus in the south. So what we have is we have this top border, and then we have a border along the eastern that starts from Haran and Damascus and runs south along the Jordan River between Israel and Gilead past the Dead Sea, and as far south as Tamar, and then this will go to this will be the eastern border, and then the southern border will go back west from Tamar to the waters of Meribeth and Kadesh, and then there will be a course of the brook of Egypt to the Mediterranean. This will be the southern border, and then the west side will be the Mediterranean itself from the southern border to the point in the north, where it goes opposite of Lebo Hamath. And then here's the verse. Divide this land within these borders among the tribes of Israel. Distribute the land as an allotment for yourselves And for the foreigners who have joined you and are raising their families among you, they will be like native born Israelites to you, and they will receive allotment among the tribes. These foreigners are to be given land within the territory of the tribe with whom they now live. I, the sovereign Lord, have spoken. So there you go. We'll be able to go and live. So if you want a condo right there along that river, it's an option. Here is the list of the tribes, and then this is where it gets the list. The territories will each receive. Territory of Dan, this is on the top of the boundary, will follow the line, and it's the same blocks all the way across. And it's equal sized blocks all the way across. So you've got Dan at the extreme north, a boundary line from across the border, and then south of Dan's territory. Asher's territory lies south of Dan. Naphtali's land lies south of Asher, extends from east to west. Then comes Manasseh, south of Naphtali, and also the territory goes from east to west. South of Manasseh is Ephraim, and then Reuben, and then Judah. All these boundaries extend from east to west. Judah is right above, then there's that special purpose land that we were looking at, that stress, that had the princes and all that. That's what we've got right there. With the temple, this area is set aside for the Lord's temple, and we see the same thing, and the descendants of Zadok live there. We see all of that there, and then the land allotted to the Levites will be the same size and same shape as that was allotted to the folks from Zadok. And then you see the city that everybody can go to. That's where the hotels are. Probably. And then additional strip of land. This will be allotted for public use. Homes, pasture lands, common lands with a city at the center. The city will be measured 1.5 miles on each side, north, south, east, and west. Open lands will surround the city 150 yards in every direction. Outside the city, there will be a farming area that stretches 3.5 miles to the east and 3.5 miles to the west. The farmland produced for the people in the city. Those who come to various tribes will work in the city of farming. The entire area, including the sacred lands of the city, square 8 miles on each side. The area will remain to the east and the west of the sacred lands belonging to the prince. Each of these areas will be 8 1/3 miles wide, extending to the opposite directions in eastern and western borders, with the sacred lands and the temples and the sanctuary and the temple in the center. So the prince's land will include everything between the territories of Judah, and now we're going to continue on, and Benjamin. Benjamin will be set aside. Territory is south of that, the rest of the tribes. Benjamin's territory will be south of the prince's land, extending the entire length from east to west. Then south of Benjamin is Simeon, extending from east to west. Next territory is Issachar, the same going from east to west boundaries. Then comes Zebulun, and then after Zebulun is Gad, and then after, so Gad is just south of Zebulun, and then Gad runs across the bottom border. These allotments of lands are set up for each tribe, exclusive possession. I, the sovereign Lord, have spoken. There will be exits of the city. The names of the exits are named for the 12 tribes. The northern wall will have 3 gates. There will be Reuben, Judah, and Levi. East wall will have 3 gates. Joseph, Benjamin, and Dan. South wall will have 3 gates. Simeon, Issachar, and Zebulun. And the west side will have Gad, Asher, and Naphtali. The distance around the entire city will be 6 miles. And from that day on, the city will be named, "The Lord is there." Folks, we've made it. We've made it through Ezekiel. It is a blessing to do this. I told you, part of the reason we commit to reading through the Bible like this is it keeps us going through even the uncomfortable stuff. As my former professor says, Ezekiel's a bit long-winded for modern audiences. But it's here for a reason. There's a picture of that. And really one of the things we see is the first truth we see here is we see God keeps his promises. Everything he promised in the Old Testament, he will do. So part of for Ezekiel is showing the whole fulfillment of the law happening. Like everything that was there. The land is gone to the people he said it was. It was the promised land, now it's it's the received promise. He was promising what the temple was supposed to be and what priests are supposed to do, what leaders are supposed to do. It's all there. So we see first of all that God keeps his promises, and then we see that God restores. He restores proper, good leadership. He restores proper priesthood. He restores even good relationships. And I would say this other element here, and I just want to put this out there. The church, we've got to remember that our church today is, in many ways, this is kind of an amazing thing about the church, is we're kind of a foretaste of that kingdom life there in the millennium. But also, that kingdom life was a picture of the oughtness of how everything was in the beginning. So in a way, when we do right relationships here, and I got to tell you, as a church, I would love to say that you have a pastor that is as pure as the driven snow, but I fail. And we have neighbors to our left and right that still fail. And we're all striving, but where the church is relying on the Holy Spirit and is working together and loving each other, that is the closest thing that we're going to get to both this amazing millennial reign here under Christ and the way that it ought to have been at the very beginning of our life. And that's a good memory of the church. And on that, we're going to tie a bow on Ezekiel. Next week, it will be a whole lot easier because we'll be launching into a book that preaches fairly easy, and that is the book of Daniel. But please understand, I'm not going to be driving you to becoming vegans just because Daniel eats only vegetables and water. Please understand, if you got nothing from today, understand that God is okay with a little bit of lamb. So on that, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you. Lord, we look at these truths, these eternal truths that are big. Lord, there's so much layers of information. You conveyed so much information, so thick to Ezekiel. One of the amazing things that we understand that every time we're going to read this, we're going to gain something else from it. Lord, we thank you for the understanding that we have today, and we look in expectation for further understanding every time that we come through Ezekiel. More than that, Lord, we're thankful that you are a restorer of everything. That just like you promised one day to restore the land of Israel to the way that it was as a garden, that we ourselves have lives that were also full of death, that our seeds were dead, if you will. But through your living water that comes in and is a promise of restoration. Lord, and then more than just a self-help, Christianity is more than just rescuing us from our problems. It then turns us into people that are able to then restore relationships that have been long dead. Lord, we pray that as we go forward this week, that you help us be an agent of that purifying, life-giving water that is you. Help us find ways to show your love and mercy to those around us, and help us show the same hope, the hope that we have for this future reign of Christ can be tasted in the church today. Lord, help us enjoy that taste and share it with others. We thank you, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. The last thing I'm saying to you is a blessing. I pray the Lord bless you and keep you, that he makes his face to shine upon you, that he's gracious to you, and he grants you peace. Amen. And I promise next week I won't run this long. I can't promise I won't run long, but just not this long. This is the longest one I've done, and I think we're there. Guys, thank you very much. I think Nat and Mary should have been making hot dogs. Did you see Nat and Mary come back?
Yeah, I saw.
So there may be hot dogs for those that want hot dogs.
Yep, but
I think there may be some sausages too. We have to put some. I don't know. We'll see. Thank you very much.